So next up is Claire Heinitz. Joe, you don't have to run. I have lots of time to tell you stories. Claire and I logged more miles than all the rest of the people in the class. It was amazing. Really an impressive driving companion, and several amazing characteristics that you have. One of the most amazing one is the ability to somehow, at 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, type in the address and location of the next restaurant that we need to get to. It was always amazing. So we had the best food with Claire was there. She had Yelp descriptions and analysis of them. No Subway. We never stopped for Subway. That was good. But it was delightful. And we traveled all over the Southwest and places we never knew existed, which is fun. And went back only a few times. So next up, Claire Heinitz. Come on up. Germplasm curator of the Southwest Species Collection down at Parlier. Yeah. Soon more, maybe. Who knows?
We'll see. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for doing this. This is such a cool way to celebrate Andy's retirement, and it would have been so easy to let it slip by as just another thing that happened in the pandemic that we didn't get to experience. And what a smart lady Lise is, too. We have all spent the last few weeks furiously texting each other going, why don't we have any pictures? Did we never take pictures? It was pre-iCloud. We don't have these pictures anymore. Andy always took all the pictures. Nobody has any pictures. And this woman called Dan, which is the right thing to do, because Dan's not here, and he got to be here, and thank you for that. So I'm Claire Heinitz. I am a curator in the National Plant Germplasm System, so I'm our first Fed for today. I'm now not the only Fed out of the Walker Lab. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what those words mean, because they might not make sense. But some of the things I learned about from Andy were the importance of what you can learn in the state of Texas and the importance of country music. So this was a real toss-up as to which country music song title was going to go in the title of my talk. So my background, okay, so Jean gave a great introduction to our love story, and I really appreciated that, and that's the big thank you from Andy, too, was assigning me a best friend as soon as I showed up. But I'm very much her mirror image. So she is direct, and she drives. She drives to the point, and I meander, and I circle, and I try never to finish anything, because that means I would have to leave. And so I put up here quickly, this is my undergraduate advisor. I have been blessed to have two wonderful advisors who give me excellent advice. And my undergraduate advisor, when I was working in Arizona on this weird plant named Wayuli that nobody's ever heard of except for history, war history weirdos, and like 10 plant science people, it makes rubber. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you. It's so cool. I might show you some at the end. Anyway, spoiler alert. His advice when I was going to go to grad school was, pick a crop that people know what it is, and that they like, and that has funding, and that has an industry, maybe that's been domesticated already. I said, cool. So I had a wonderful, beautiful friend who is a bon vivant and going to culinary school, and as we're having a dinner party and enjoying some wine, and I'm agonizing over what to do and what crop to pick, and I'm thinking about saving the world with wheat or like something boring like that, he goes, you know there's a school at Davis. So, as my advisor said, you pick the best school for the thing and the best plant breeder who's working on it. And you go. And I asked, and he said yes, and I can't believe it. And as several people have mentioned about him seeing things in you that you didn't see in yourself, or you have these plans as like a really, really intelligent 22-year-old about what you're going to do with your life. And I showed up, and he said, no fancy pants winemaker. Like, he knew that that was not the thing. He said, no, you're a plant person, and you see the differences in plants. You care about the differences in plants. You care about the desert. I've got this other project. I came from Arizona. So he paired me up with Jean. We TA'd. Beyond that, I didn't learn a thing about Vitis vinifera. It was 100% wild species, and the ecology and the conservation there. And as I was coming to the end of grad school and really not wanting to leave, he said, hey, there's this position that's opened up within the National Plant Germplasm System to be a curator, and these curator positions don't open up. It's not with GRAPE, it's with Waiuli. It's the Waiuli curator position. But don't worry, you won't get it because you're right out of grad school and these positions are highly coveted, and don't worry. And I got it. So luckily, the National Plant Germplasm System is also a family, and I've been able to access and influence the grape conservation program as well with the new crops too. So that's me with one of my other crops down here in the bottom, which is Nopales, or prickly pear, down in Parlier. So this is my standard quote that I show people when we're talking about the philosophy of genetic resource conservation. And this is kind of the old colonial model of it, which is, let's bring the plants here to the US. Let's give ourselves something. And the second half of this quote is especially if it's a small grains crop, but I ignore that part. But here's the real one. So, you know, if you're wearing a hat, please remove, for Thomas Volney Munson. This is a quote that he had in his chapter of his 1903 book, Foundations of American Grape Culture, speaking about Vitis duaniana, which is a hybrid species of grape that only grows along the Red River between Texas and Oklahoma. And he said, here then is another wild treasure from which may spring a grand family of grapes for the arid regions of the West. And that was over 100 years ago, and he is absolutely right. He is still right about this species. So these are some of the plant exploration strategies that I learned from Andy. I didn't realize this is a job that you could still have in the 21st century, and it is very different than it used to be. We have the Convention on Biological Diversity now. We respect people's sovereign rights to their plant material and the relationships that we have with them. We respect intellectual property, things like that. But the tools that I learned coming out of Andy's lab and working with him as a researcher and a humanist and a realistic person and somebody with a horticultural mind going to look for plants have been invaluable. So the first thing you do is you look for gaps in your collection, and then you look for collecting opportunities. So where can you get material? Who has material that you can go get? You have to understand the ecology of your plant. You have to do extensive record searches. As Eric mentioned earlier, having everything digitized now makes that easier, but it's also a flood of information. And you have to build relationships with people. So I'm gonna show you, hopefully, some pictures of collecting two different crops, one that you know about and one that you don't. So first we'll start with North American Vitis. And again, I'm sorry, these pictures are all of me collecting because I was taking notes and he was taking pictures and driving. So, collecting North American Vitis, again, why does it matter? You all know why it matters. We directly use North American Vitis as rootstocks. Even in parts of the world where phylloxera is not an issue, like Chile, there's still a benefit to rootstocks for many other traits. And it's these traits beyond just phylloxera resistance that are going to be the future of rootstock use in the industry, how they can help us manage new challenges of climate change, and it's these new species that can help with that, new species. And it's that point that I've been making recently within the genetic resource conservation community that up until this point has seen the North American Vitis species as kind of a tertiary crop wild relative of the important European domesticated grapevine. And getting them to create a new classification of, no, these are rootstock species for direct use. We use them exactly as they are. They do not need extensive crossbreeding to make an impact in the industry, and that means they're a much higher priority for conservation. So speaking of that effort in terms of classifying the crop wild relatives of North America, this is some work that a bunch of us from the lab did with a book on the crop wild relatives of North America. We contributed the grape chapter. And so this is some modeling that we did as part of that. So these are species distribution models based on what is known and what is typically accepted. So on the left-hand map is just the common species used for rootstocks. And because I was leading this effort, I also threw in Vitis gerdiana and also Vitis duaniana because I thought they were important. But I wanted to show that basically there's this hole where everything in between there traditionally is considered Vitis arizonica, maybe a little bit of Vitis duaniana. You can also see on the species richness one on the right, the colors aren't totally good here, but basically the most species richness in the whole of North America is centered in Texas. There is something weird going on in Texas in terms of biodiversity. But again, are we really sure that everything else in Arizona and New Mexico is one species? So why did we focus on the southwestern species? Not just because I came from Arizona and I really liked it and I was willing to go back there and drive around. Really, we had a lack of understanding of the taxonomy and the population dynamics. There's the threat of genetic erosion. Not only are they losing their habitat, but everybody has a hobby vineyard. And your vinifera pollen blows in and crossbreeds with these. Does some cool ecological things. It's interesting, these hybrids that it makes, but those are no longer useful to us for rootstock breeding, for example. And they have direct, great potential use in rootstock breeding for all of these cool disease resistances and abiotic stress tolerance, which is mostly what I focused on. Carl didn't stick around to get any of our digs back at him, but I'm not gonna show you any data today. So Eric already did a really beautiful job of explaining to you the Sky Island concept and some of the morphological diversity in these vines that are all supposedly the same species. So we know there's more diversity out there than that is being captured in just the flora, the textbooks. And we know that because Dr. Walker taught us to pick out these important differences. What I didn't realize until I got out into the real world is if you haven't been trained by a skilled horticulturalist or a skilled taxonomist, you don't see these differences. So we did a lot of collecting. We did a lot more targeted collecting because I cared more about what was going on within the populations and who was breeding with who and what was hybridizing where. And this collection exists today and is the legacy of Dr. Walker and is continuing to generate really productive research for the people in the department. It's gonna be there for Professor Luis Diaz when he comes in, and it's a huge resource. Collecting with Andy, I learned some things. So you can do whatever you want to a rental car, whatever you want that is not on the contract, as long as you build in the time required to clean it properly afterwards. And these things were spotless when we returned them. So I'm just gonna flash quickly now through a few pictures from our collecting trips. In Arizona, collecting little vines. In Texas, collecting big vines. So this is slightly weedy Vitis candy cans. The no vines on the Red River. This is where the relationships come in. This is Vitis duaniana that's super important, becoming very endangered in its local range, and you have to talk to people to get it. Oklahoma, wildlife hazards, convincing this guy that no, we really did need to wait for the buffalo to leave. This is how people get hurt. This is my view from the passenger seat, agreeing that this is now a safe distance from which to photograph the buffalo and not to chase them down with the car. And we did wait around for that one. New Mexico, sacred vines growing in sacred waters. He totally humored me on this one. I said, you know, I visited a mission in northern New Mexico one time when I was a kid that had like, you know, special holy waters. But thinking about it now with this brain, I bet there's grapes there. I said, what? Yeah, covered in grapes. And then I love this picture because it's grapes growing with opuntia and yucca, which I went on to grow and work with. And the reason that this collection still exists, and exists not as, we didn't just go get DNA, we didn't get herbarium specimens, we got both of those things, but we got living vines that are still here today for people to make crosses with, for people to do more work, is because of good vineyard support, and that was Nina. So finally gonna wrap up with just telling you that the National Plant Germplasm System exists. We have these publicly available collections of every single crop. So my collection is the one down here in Parlier near Fresno. We care about crop wild relatives, and we're caring more about rootstocks as a special class of crop wild relatives. The current status of ex situ, that means in the germplasm system, kind of like a zoo, these are all Vitis species. Down at the bottom are all these cool species I've been telling you about. 1 or 2 species, or 1 or 2 accessions. That's all that's in the public national plant germplasm system. So that obviously doesn't cover the diversity that we see in the field. And that's why the UC Davis collection is so important. And also, we're still working on in situ conservation efforts. This is a model of the historic range of Vitis rupestris versus the dots, which are the current surviving populations. So at this point, I'm gonna skip the new fun stuff, and you can come and talk about it with me if you want. But basically, what I learned from Andy is you have to be willing to still go to the other side of nowhere. I still end up in the middle of nowhere in Texas. For some reason, all the plants I care about are in Texas. And you still find good plants there. So thank you, and I'm really sorry for this slide. I really wasn't sure if I wanted to include it. Jean talked me into it. But this is the very first vine that I ever found and collected with Andy. Samara was on this trip. This was about an hour east of Tucson. And it's just the kind of encouragement from back at the car that tells you, yeah, that's a dead thing. That's a big dead horse. Yeah, it smells bad, but like, those are some, go, and like, wait, no, stand there and let me take a picture. Let me take a picture, and it'll be great. So thank you very much. Thank you, Andy.
I've never been a fan of horses, but that was really one I was not happy about at all. It looked like a full living room rug. And it was about 3/4 decomposed, and the smell was unbelievable. And Claire was a trooper. I took the picture, she took the goods.